if you don't get regulation, I think you could argue that cryptos will eventually go to zero, right? Because think about this, after FTX, and you had a bunch of big money. I mean, Tom Brady, Gisele Bündchen, Kevin O'Leary. I mean, all of these big players were involved in FTX, and now everyone saw that blow up, and there's no sports stars, there's no celebrities, there's no big money that is willing to go near any crypto anymore. There's no quiet in this market these days, whether it's the Fed or the dollar or FTX there's just anything. You turn any direction and there's something new bubbling up. So it keeps us on our toes. But like I always say, volatility creates opportunity. So again, whether we're in a bear market or a bull market, there's always opportunity. You just have to look for it. Yeah, so there's a lot of similarities with it. I mean, you talk about the earth-shattering kind of event that Lehman Brothers was in terms of shaking the industry to its core. And I think you've seen that in crypto. I mean, this is really the big earthquake if you're looking for one. And then what you're looking at also is how does the crypto market come out of this? And one of the interesting things when you look at how an exchange in crypto is virtually the same as a bank is in the economy, right? So, the banks obviously lend, they give you leverage, they give you all these kind of things to do. Well, that's what the exchanges do essentially. So there's a lot of similarities in what they are and ultimately how they failed, right? Lehman Brothers took risks that they shouldn't have taken. They leveraged themselves up way too much. FTX did the same thing. So there's a lot of those similarities. And then you look at things like the charts and you start to say, okay, did the market bottom when Lehman Brothers collapsed? And the answer is no. It took about 5 to 6 months to bottom. So you start saying, okay, if this is a Lehman Brothers moment, when does this give us? Does this finally give us that timeline when crypto could bottom? And I think it does. And I also think that if you look back to the 2008, 2009 period, you saw these banks misbehaving like a lot of these exchanges are, Celsius, Voyager, and now FTX. And you saw regulation come out of it. I looked at the charts and I said, okay, well, when Lehman Brothers occurred, how long did it take for the markets, the S&P to bottom? That was 5 to 6 months. And then I also looked and I said, okay, well, what type of fall did we see following? In the following 5 to 6 months, how much did the S&P fall? The answer is about 40 to 45%. So Wow. If you take 40 to 45% away from the current levels on Bitcoin, it puts you right around $9,000 as a potential low.
Well, that's not the 12,000 we spoke about recently. What is it because of FTX? Because there are people out there, Gareth, that are saying, that's it. Bitcoin's dead. It was always a Ponzi scheme. Once a Ponzi scheme, always a Ponzi scheme. I told you so.
I think that it's somewhat misguided because, again, number one, Ponzi schemes are a little bit different in their functionality, but I think also you look at the US dollar, and who's to say that that's not a Ponzi scheme? All we do as a country is borrow to repay debts that we have, and it's kind of just repaying, and we just borrow more to do that. So in many senses, you could say the US dollar and the US economy is built that same way. But the key is that Bitcoin is now being adopted by more and more people. There's big money involved. I think FTX is a major issue because it really creates mistrust in the crypto industry. But again, from mistrust, regulation will come, which will create transparency. And once you have transparency, that's where real trust is built, right? I mean, before this, we didn't have transparency and we were just hoping that everything was fine. But we know now that's not the case. And so you have that transparency that comes from regulation. And that's what's going to drive big money to invest, in my opinion, in Bitcoin and in Ethereum. I've been saying for well over a year that we needed regulation in the space. And again, the key thing is you just need common sense regulation. Now, whether our politicians can actually come up with common sense, I would doubt that. But the hope is, and you have to look at it like this, right? Is it better to have no regulation and then people doing what Sam Bankman-Fried did and mismanaging, client funds and over leveraging and basically people losing fortunes or all their money? Or is it better to have some regulation in the space, maybe a little too much just because our politicians generally do that, but is it better than nothing? And for me, I'm an investor. I want to make money, right? So for me, the deregulation, or I should say the decentralization, isn't as keen of a point as whether or not Bitcoin goes up. Listen, if Bitcoin goes to zero, it doesn't really matter if it's decentralized or not, right? You
Yeah.
have to have the foundations of trust, and you have to have rules and regulations to do that. So my hope is that the government doesn't overregulate. I think that for the most part, gold, or I should say Bitcoin, is the digital gold, and that will create its own kind of intrigue once we get transparency in the system. If you don't get regulation, I think you could argue that cryptos will eventually go to zero, right? Because think about this, after FTX, and you had a bunch of big money. I mean, Tom Brady, Gisele Bündchen, Kevin O'Leary. I mean, all of these big players were involved in FTX, and now everyone saw that blow up, and there's no sports stars, there's no celebrities, there's no big money that is willing to go near any crypto anymore until they have some sort of transparency, because it's not worth their fortunes, it's not worth their reputations now, right? You have some major tarnishing on reputations. I know there's lawsuits being filed and all that stuff. So the question is are there enough small investors to really create that push in Bitcoin to have it go to 100,000, to have it go to $1 million? And again, I don't know that. And I think that's my biggest concern, is that without that transparency, without that regulation, you're not going to lure the big money in that can really drive it to the upside. In reality, it's probably smarter for the central banks to kind of clamp down and the politicians to kind of just get rid of it, because then you only have one option, the US dollar. I mean, you could say gold, other currencies, but this is the beauty of politicians. They all want to get votes, right? It's all about doing what's popular. And right now, the popular thing that's going to get them votes is to get regulation and transparency and make it so a lot of their constituents don't end up losing money in the future, right? They want to be seen acting like, oh, people got hurt. All right, how do we act and make ourselves look good? And that's the beauty of it. So in a weird way, if politicians were farsighted, meaning they looked really far out, they would probably get rid of Bitcoin and get rid of crypto. But they're also micro viewpoint, right? They all want to get reelected in 4 years here in the US. And that's one of the reasons why I think you get Bitcoin to stick around, you get crypto to stick around. And actually, it actually helps the crypto case here. So number one, I think that there's a lot of politicians that secretly have crypto holdings. I know some have said they do, but I think it's more than we realize. Mainly because they're on the cutting edge of knowing what's going on. They see the revolution out there. They see what the blockchain is going to be. They understand some of these big money players getting in. And I also think that, you look at places like Texas in the US. Texas is a massive place where there's mining going on. There's huge amounts of jobs based on the blockchain. So Texas being a huge state, you have a lot of politicians just there alone that are pushing for good quality regulation, and they want the blockchain. They want crypto to survive. If you look at it, Bitcoin and cryptos in general, there's so many companies in the crypto market that are under distress now, whether they had exposure to FTX or Solana, which has collapsed down from $30 in the last couple of weeks to 12 or 13 or 14. There's a lot of hurt going on. And what's going to happen is they're going to be forced to liquidate positions to kind of cover debts. And we even see that with FTX. There's probably a lot of liquidations there alone when they're trying to pay back investors. So there's going to be this continual kind of selling pressure in crypto in the near term. You're going to get bounces, but for the most part, I think it trickles down. I think also the mere fact that you don't have the regulation now totally takes the big buyer away. For me, I do have investments in Bitcoin, but they're relatively small to my overall portfolio. And the main reason is I don't want to have, I'm a trader, so I need to have it on an exchange, but I don't want to have a lot of my money on any exchange. So it's just like, okay, you know what? I will sit back, I will wait patiently and wait until the right opportunity where we get transparency comes in. Yeah, so there's no doubt there's additional risk by having it on an exchange. I think for me, and again, by the way, this is, I have no inside scoop, but for all I know, the places I have my money could be gone tomorrow. But something like a Coinbase, where it's a publicly traded stock, I would hope that the SEC is a little bit more involved there, so it's a little safer. I hear Kraken is audited twice a year, so there hopefully are exchanges that are better quality. But again, in this environment, nothing is 100%. We have to understand that. There's no FDIC insurance here in crypto like there is in stock accounts, where the government guarantees your money if it vanishes. And so people just have to be aware of that. And so cold storage is definitely one way to do it. Because I'm more of a swing trader, I don't do that, but I definitely limit the amount of money that's on the exchange. I mean, it just shows you that no one's immune, and part of that is human nature, where there's greed that comes involved. But also, I mean, it's very hard to spot these things. Like, think about, and I bring this up, we talked about how Lehman Brothers is very, connected in a weird way to the FTX, but you could look at Enron. I mean, Enron operated for years doing basically fraud, and no one caught on until the market finally collapsed in that area, and then they couldn't hide it. You look at some of the other players, WorldCom or Bernie Madoff, right? And as long as the economy and the market was doing well, Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme could be paid off. He could just pay anyone who wanted to get out with new money. As soon as the market crashed or got real weak, he couldn't do that anymore. So I mean, this is the thing, is it's very, in bull markets, shady players can hide things very easily, and even the best of us can get fooled. There's no doubt about it. So what I do is I don't try to pick the bottom, but I realize that I want to be in Bitcoin longer term. And so when we're down here, I've already basically accumulated what I would consider to be 1/6 of what I hope to hold in the longer term. And the reason I do that, even expecting that it could go down to 9,000, is that, if I'm wrong, I don't want to be sitting here with no Bitcoin, right? So I'm willing to buy a little bit here, then buy a little bit more here, then a little bit more here and here and here. And the idea is that by dollar cost averaging into my full position, I'm able to kind of mitigate the risk of missing the trade, while also mitigating the risk of, if it goes to 9K, I don't want to be all in at 17,000, for instance, right? So it's a way of adjusting and handling risk. And I think it's a really smart investment decision for most people to do, is to just inch into positions, right? You don't know the future. We can all think we know the future, but we honestly don't. And so you kind of have to mitigate those risks. One of the positives about the Ethereum chart is that the June low has not been taken out yet, versus what we've seen in Bitcoin. Bitcoin has taken out the June low. So I think that's a small positive. I think that Ethereum will thrive once there's some more transparency, but it's still one of those scenarios where if Bitcoin's going to 9,000, I've got to imagine that Ethereum probably breaks lower and maybe tests this $650 level at some point before the bottom is in. But again, longer term, I love Bitcoin, I love Ethereum. You just got to ride the rocky rail here in the near term.